Good morning, my fellow patriots. Lord Stompy here in Adelaide, South Australia. Welcome to the show. Okay, today's show I'm going to take a completely different angle from most of my other videos. I'm going to take a trip down memory lane and tell you about an amazing friend of mine, a guy named John McGovern. And this is going to be the story of how John McGovern ended up being part of a project at Los Alamos Laboratories. And Los Alamos Laboratories, they're the major weapons testing institute in New Mexico. And John McGovern was selected for a program at Los Alamos to be part of a team building a giant new age global hyperdimensional brain on their supercomputer. Not exaggerating here at all. He was a selected candidate, and they were using people like John McGovern as raw human data or raw human input to build a multi-dimensional hyperbrain of some sort on the Los Alamos supercomputer. And this is, of course, a very standard conspiracy theory as such. It's not even a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact. There's lots of YouTube videos talk about all this sort of, the government's building these giant supercomputer brains to rule the world. Well, yeah, the government is doing these kind of things. I wouldn't even call it the government. I would call it the elites. I would say these are the people above our governments, the real rulers of the world. Now, the thing is I'm not going to delve into the deep conspiracy theories. When I get to telling you about John McGovern and his role, I'm just going to tell you some facts. I'm not going to go into speculation. Most of this story, it actually is a backstory leading up to John becoming part of this project. I believe that the backstory is every bit as interesting as the story about this project for the New Age global brain. So sit back, grab yourselves a cup of tea, and let's get on with the story. So first of all, we have to reverse the clock back to the late 1980s. When I was a juvenile delinquent. Now, I grew up with an incredibly neurotic middle-class family, and by the time I was 15, my neurotic single mother, I came home and all my belongings were thrown out in the street. She'd basically kicked me out of the house with no warning. So suddenly, I didn't really have any place to call home or to go to anymore. So I was living the life of a complete juvenile delinquent with no rules, no regulations. I was getting up to all sorts of petty criminal behaviour, taking all sorts of crazy drugs, doing all this crazy stuff. Now, at that time in my life, I had a friend. He was a real space cadet hippie, and his name was Michael Bates. And he'd often be talking all this crazy, weird, hippie new age stuff. And we all thought Michael Bates was kind of goofy, but we kind of liked him because we'd sit around smoking marijuana with him, and he seemed to have a supply of free marijuana from somewhere. And one day I finally went back to Michael's house, and this is where I found out where the supply of free marijuana was coming from, because I walked through the door and I met Michael's stepdad, and his stepdad was John McGovern. And John was a 4'11", overzealous hippie Scotsman. And he was sitting there wearing all this tie-dye. And he was a friendly guy. He was a friendly guy, very bright, very high IQ, actually. And he was eccentric as hell as well. He was mad as a bag of cut snakes, in with the bargain. So very interesting personality type here right away. The first thing that happened when I walked through the door was John McGovern offered us both this pipe of marijuana to share with him. And he had this classic sort of long bamboo sort of Native American Indian pipe. It was all very peace and love, man. So we sat down and got stoned with John. And my young, naive, stupid brain was suddenly getting saturated with THC, and I'm getting really high. And then John launches into all this highfalutin, high IQ, new age babble that was mixed in with all this scientific fact. And to me, as a young, stupid person, I was just like, and I was suddenly really stoned. I'm just thinking, oh my God, this guy's amazing. He knows all the deepest secrets of the universe. John knows all the answers to life. Wow. This is incredible. So, needless to say, there was a supply of free marijuana at John McGovern's house. And there was all these crazy new age hippies there that were all part of this hippie new age cult. And but me being young and, basically I was just a sponge. I was a drug sponge, man. And I like crazy and weird things. My whole background, my middle class background was crazy. I was a hooligan on the streets, getting up to all this crazy stuff. And so almost straight away, I began hanging out with this new age community. And to me, I did think they were very eccentric, and I thought they were weird hippies. But because of my street background and my incredibly dysfunctional middle class background, to me, this new age community seemed kind of like a family. Very, very quickly, I was like, oh, these guys are cool, it's all peace, love, and drugs, and talking this highfalutin, crazy shit, man. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, let's all do this. This is cool. So I was in like Flynn. And looking back, the personality I had, essentially, I had a reasonable IQ, but I was just really lost and dysfunctional. I was a classic candidate for joining these new age cults. I was a classic kind of person that would automatically fall into this situation. So very quickly, I was joining in with these people, and we were sitting around crystals, and we were chanting the names of all these higher deities or higher intelligence beings, is the way they'd put it. And it was all so exciting at the time. It was the late 80s, and in the West, in the late 80s, things were still great in many ways. There was a lot of other dysfunctional dark shit going on, but essentially society in the West in the late 80s was very positive. It was still very cohesive. The economy was going strong. And society still had quite a lot of a traditional basis. And we hadn't been totally flooded with all these waves of immigration from totally different cultures. So we hadn't entirely annihilated our own culture with all this crazy New Age stuff, and we hadn't entirely diluted ourselves with all this other immigration. It was the kind of society back then when you knew your neighbours, and people weren't all destroyed by social media and the internet. So human interactions were very organic and natural. And if you look at any footage of the way people generally behaved in the 1980s, if you review that kind of footage, people were just really confident and carefree and organic. It was the last of the golden era for the West. And so I was really, I was really riding that wave of that last buoyancy and confidence and optimism. And all these boomers who were the children of the consciousness revolution, there was a massive amount of that stuff around back in the 80s. There's so many people who were all influenced to the core by all these crazy New Age ideas. And there was whole magazines that you could get in newsagents. One of the main magazines was called Nexus. But it was actually, back then it was a really big deal. We all thought we were bravely forging through all these new social and spiritual frontiers. And, we were destroying the old systems that were oppressing us. John McGovern, he had 2 wives. And he was up for all sorts of crazy stuff. The old institutions of marriage, etc., were oppressive, and all that sort of stuff. All that nonsense. So that's what I was heavily into as a teenager and a young man. We did all sorts of interesting things. Sometimes we'd take holidays, and we'd go visit sacred spots. One time we went out to the desert. We went far into the desert, about 600 kilometers. And we went to this sacred site and did all this meditation and chanting of the sacred names. What's really interesting was the next night, my friend and I had split off from the main group, and we were staying in this tiny desert town called Parachilna. It was a town with about 11 people at the time, and a single hotel, the Parachilna Hotel. And the house we were in, it was so primitive, there was an outside toilet. So I went to this outside toilet, and as I came out, I looked up, and there was 3 unusual lights in the sky. And these lights were above this amazing geological formation in the South Australian desert. This formation is called Wilpena Pound. And the indigenous Aboriginal people of the area, the Adnyamatma people, they believe Wilpena Pound is the sacred centre of creation for their people. So there was these 3 unusual lights just hovering above Wilpena Pound. I was thinking, that's really weird. What's going on here? Without warning, these lights began changing colours. So they were flashing all the colours of the rainbow. And then they began performing all these totally unexplained synchronized movements that defied the laws of conventional physics. So these lights were darting this way and that way. they were hovering and then accelerating to about 20,000 kilometers an hour with no, there was no build up, no, it was just like, and all three of these lights were performing complex synchronized patterns together. And to this day, I have no explanation of what these lights were. I ran inside the house and I called out my friend. It was Michael Bates, my friend from school, who was staying in this house with me. So we all went out and we looked at these lights and stood there in trance for about 20 minutes. And so back at the time, with all this new age conditioning, I basically just assumed these lights were these higher dimensional intelligence and that they were trying to somehow communicate with us, etc., etc. So there's that whole grab bag behind there of all these new age ideas had tied into basically this whole not just religious philosophy but life outlook. And as the 80s progressed into the 90s, we moved out of the last of the golden age of Western civilization, and that was the age of... Suddenly, it was the age of disintegration. This is very obvious now. Suddenly, the main music that was popular was grunge. That was the main popular music innovation of the time. So suddenly there was this really sad, angry and angsty music, and it was all about emptiness and questioning and basically the older generation, the boomers, had their consciousness revolution had been successful. They'd destroyed the old order. They'd destroyed the old social order. They'd destroyed the old spiritual order. And this was seen as a wonderful thing, but then suddenly you just had this wilderness. It was a social and a spiritual wilderness. All this highfalutin ideology wasn't fulfilling the spiritual needs of the younger generation. It really wasn't fulfilling any need at all. And as the social dislocation in the West began to really kick in, I noticed the same time this New Age group I was with, the same thing was happening socially and spiritually within the group. So in the late 80s, when I first became involved, everyone was buoyant and they were positive and they were optimistic, and there was no boundaries anymore, and we could all do whatever we want, and we're all taking all these heavy drugs and chanting sacred names and liberating the earth and liberating ourselves, and a lot of the people in the group were doing wife and partner swapping because it was now it was the age of Aquarius, and you were being oppressive if you banned your wife from screwing your friends, etc. And so at the same time, this New Age group was suddenly starting to disintegrate, and it began happening slowly, but then it just went really, really fast. The same way that Western society did in the 90s. We were all on this high, and then suddenly, very quickly, everyone was confused, and things weren't sort of working out how everyone expected. We all expected this, that we'd end up transforming into this age of peace, love and harmony, and that just never happened, obviously. Otherwise we'd all be living in the utopia now. The expected New Age utopia has never arrived, and it will never arrive. So that's the social background. Now, central to all of this, John McGovern was the unquestioned alpha male. He was the leader. He was the guru. He was the alpha man. He had 2 wives. He had an exceptionally high IQ. He had an exceptional memory for retaining scientific knowledge and facts and combining it all with this New Age gobbledygook, you see. And basically, John's Bible and the Bible of the whole New Age scene at the time, that was a very powerful and influential scene, was a key book. And this book was called The Keys of Enoch. And it's by a Jewish guy called J.J. Hurtak. And J.J. Hurtak is a man who is very much like John McGovern. He's an incredibly high IQ man, and he's got a number of actually quite considerable university degrees. He's fluent in ancient languages such as Aramaic and ancient Hebrew. He's able to read source texts. He's got a few other degrees. So J.J. Hurtak is a very disciplined and high IQ person, and he wrote this book in 1972 called The Keys of Enoch. And to this day, The Keys of Enoch is seen as a cutting-edge book that really helped to shape the modern New Age scene. Now, I used to try to read The Keys of Enoch, and essentially it's a lot of very high IQ, high-level scientific facts mixed with all this crazy Gnostic mysticism and Kabbalism. It's very heavily a Kabbalah type book. So there we have it, J.J. Hurtak's Jewish, and he's basically a scientist as well, and he's written the key texts that very early on in the New Age movement history that very much helped to shape and define the higher levels of the New Age spiritual system. He was seen as the man that wrote pretty much the source text, and Hurtak has written many more books since, and he still, to this day, remains an incredibly influential figure on the New Age scene. In fact, Hurtak has a lot of influence at the UN itself. So this is how high up in the global system Hurtak is. He's able to influence millions of people on the ground with New Age mysticism, but he's also accepted very much in the higher ranks of the globalist system too. So Hurtak himself pulls a lot of weight. Now, as I was saying, in the 90s, the New Age group began to disintegrate. And my own innate gut-level street instincts began to tell me that something wasn't quite right about this whole New Age group and the whole scene. One thing I did notice was that over time, a disproportionately large number of people within that New Age group had literally gone insane to the point where they were institutionalized. So a number of those people just lost their lunch, man. They and I was there. I was watching these people just cracking up and going completely balmy. John McGovern's one of his wives ended up permanently insane. John himself at times was incredibly unstable. He'd oscillate between being incredibly functional and high IQ, and then just be this complete babbling mess. There was various other people within the scene who I watched completely crack up. So this new age group here in my hometown, it was the core, the most influential new age group in terms of popularity, and it ended up a large percentage of the people, after being part of that group for a long time, all went completely nuts. Okay, so this is a really is a social reflection within the New Age group that as they were cracking up within this New Age mystical system, society was cracking up around us as well. And so I left the group essentially, and I didn't have contact with them for quite a long time. In the interim, I was doing other things, obviously. In the interim, one of my friends gave me an incredibly helpful book that really helped me make sense of the entire New Age movement. And this book was by Clive Prince and Clive Prince and somebody picked it. Anyway, the book was called The Stargate Conspiracy. Okay, and this was a very, very well-researched book. All the sources were annotated. And the Stargate Conspiracy, it basically showed that the New Age religious movement that we see today, the New Age religious movement that is, it's always been promoted as the new religion, the escape from the oppression of the old religions. The New Age movement was, in many ways, has for 100 years, it's always had a very, very large amount of influence from the secret services in USA and Britain, especially, as the New Age movement was essentially even the Nazis. So there's been this 100 years of connection with government secret societies and secret societies with a lot of influence, such as the Masons. All these kind of people have been incredibly hard at work behind the scenes, creating the New Age movement. So superficially, the New Age religion is promoted as this liberation theology, and it's promoted as just something that's organic, that's just fallen down from the cosmos during the age of Aquarius, and it's just been this organic spiritual happening, as like in Woodstock and all these other things were just this part of this whole organic happening. But the reality is that for 100 years behind the scene, there's been all these very powerful and dark forces influential in creating the New Age movement. So when I read this book, The Stargate Conspiracy, I ended up realizing the absolute depths of the government and the elites' involvement in creating this new system. I was kind of really blown away, because it made me question not just the New Age movement, but a lot of my own New Age assumptions about life and the universe. And it really made me question the governmental and elite involvement in shaping human consciousness on this planet. So there was this period where I was really reformulating my whole thoughts on all these issues. And after about 5 or 6 years of no contact with the group or no contact with John McGovern, I ended up phoning up John McGovern and just catching up to see how he's doing. And he said, "Oh, I'm doing great. I'm currently working in partnership with the Los Alamos laboratories." And I said to John, "That's really, really weird, man." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, it is." He said, I'm in this project. They're asking me all these incredibly complex questions. And John was liaising with such people like scientists like astrophysicists and all these high-level scientists. And they were running him through all these questions and tests. And they were recording all this as data. And they were feeding this data into their supercomputer as raw human input. And I said, "Wow, that's John. I'm really surprised. You're working now within the system." And he said, "Yeah, I am. And he had this kind of weird hippie rhetoric that he was trying to, get his new age ideas in there and change the system." And I said, "Why are Los Alamos doing this? What is the point of this?" And John said, "Well, they pick me and 100 people around the world as people having the most unique thought, the most unique thinking patterns and outlook on life. And we were people of interest to the Los Alamos laboratories. And what they're doing is they're doing a long-term experiment where they're basically building up these maps, these hyperdimensional maps on their supercomputer, where they're building a map of the brain type and the thinking patterns of each individual. And then essentially they were going to combine the 100 most unique thinkers' brains together in cyberspace and try to create this global hyperdimensional new age brain. Was pretty much exactly how John explained this to me. So anyway, that's the story of the project of the global new age human brain that John McGovern was involved with. And, I'm not going to embellish on what the Los Alamos laboratories were going to do with this human brain. Any of that would just be my own conjecture, and there's no point me trying to guess what kind of nefarious things that the military-industrial complex is going to be doing with this hyperdimensional new age brain that they've created in their supercomputer. But the background story that I wanted to illustrate to you people today is the on-the-ground reality of the New Age movement, and me having been a part of it and having seen the effects that this whole movement has had on Western civilization, and looking at the outcomes, the final outcomes of the New Age movement on civilization as a whole, the world civilization. And then after I left the New Age cult and all that craziness, and eventually being lucky enough to find a book that reviewed the whole New Age movement in a very candid and intelligent way. And the Stargate conspiracy pointed out just how much of a global psyop the entire New Age movement has been. And looking back now from the vantage of my own experience in life, and having lived through certain periods of Western history where I actually saw these transformations taking place, I will summarize my entire story by saying that the New Age movement is a long-term, multi-generational psyop that was set up by the elites. Back in it began really kicking in the late Victorian era. So the elites right back then were already beginning to dabble in this this kind of weird Gnosticism, neo-paganism. Back then they were already thinking about trying to use it as a force on the general public. And since those early days, there's been this massive inculcation throughout the 20th century of these, and then this infusion of all these ideas in a very controlled way into the Western public consciousness. And it was done in such a cunning way, it made the general public think that they were actually organically discovering all these ideas on their own, and that somehow this global consciousness, this cosmic consciousness was this intelligence that was far greater than human was somehow infusing these ideas through the ether into people like John McGovern, these leaders of the movement. And somehow this was just organically growing within the community, and that the general community thought that this whole New Age paradigm was something that they were doing themselves to revolutionize the world. And this never has such an untrue thing been the case. This whole thing from beginning to end, in my estimation, has been a global psyop of epic proportions. And the global psyop is basically one of the main agendas was to destroy the traditional basis of the West. And they've done it. They've managed to actually do it. It's been a complete success. The other part of the operation, I believe, was and still is, these people kind of want to institute their new religion onto the masses, which has been essentially mostly successful. I'm not going to go too much into the conjecture there. I don't know the exact elite plan, and the elites themselves, they're very pragmatic. They'll have a plan at one point in time, and if it doesn't entirely work out the way they want it to, they'll adjust it, because what the elites have, they have an end goal, and they're happy to use various plans, and they're happy to change their plan to achieve the final goal, the final solution. So I was there to see the New Age movement really flourish, and I was there to see the fallout and the transformations and the effects it had on Western society, and it had a massive impact on me. And then later in life I became Christian, and I reviewed the impact that all these things had on Western civilization, and I was lucky enough to read a well-researched book that explained what all this stuff was. And looking back, this is what we've had, we've had this complete transformation for the worst. And I'm going to do a part 2 of this series. Maybe even a part 3. I'll see how this goes. I've been talking a long time now. So I'm doing my best to condense a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge into videos that make sense to the average person. And if you've stuck around to the end, thank you for listening. I'm a musician, and I have my own original music for sale online, so check the links below. You can listen to my music and you can purchase it and try to help me out. And God bless you all. Thank you once again for listening, and keep the faith. Deus Vult.